"Can I work for food?" asked the elderly widow to the restaurant owner. Hope Anderson clutched her cloth bag to her chest as she walked along the cobblestone sidewalk in the historic center of Charleston. She had lost everything in recent months and now had to swallow her pride to survive another day. That's when she stopped in front of the restaurant Mountain Flavors and mustered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her throat for weeks. The owner, a young chef around 35 named Michael Thompson, eyed her skeptically as she whispered in a trembling voice, "Sir, can I work for food?" Michael was about to politely decline when Hope opened her worn-out bag. The aroma that filled the air made him stop mid-sentence. Inside the bag, small glass jars held spices he recognized immediately but had spent years searching for in vain. "Where did you get authentic local saffron and dried Carolina Reaper pepper?" he asked, completely forgetting the woman's humble appearance. "My grandmother taught me how to make them, sir. She worked in a big house here in Charleston, cooking for a very important family. Before she passed, she shared all her secrets with me." Michael hesitated. His restaurant was struggling financially, and he couldn't afford to hire anyone. But those spices, they were exactly what he needed to impress the food critic who would visit the following week. "You can stay for a week," he finally said. "But that's it, just 1 week." Hope nodded gratefully, unaware that this decision would change both their lives forever. That same afternoon, as Hope organized the spices on a small shelf Michael had given her, sous chef Samantha Miller watched her with suspicion. Samantha had worked hard to get where she was and didn't like seeing a stranger meddling in her kitchen. "Michael, have you lost your mind?" she murmured to the chef when they stepped aside. "We can barely pay the staff we already have." "Relax, Samantha, it's just a week." "And did you see her spices? They're ingredients I've been searching for years." Samantha wasn't convinced. There was something about the way the old woman handled the utensils, as if she knew secrets Samantha herself didn't. It unsettled her deeply. Hope spent the first few days observing and helping with simple tasks. She washed dishes, peeled vegetables, organized the pantry. But her experienced eyes caught every movement in the kitchen, every spice used, every technique applied. On Thursday, when one of the cooks didn't show up, Michael found himself struggling to prepare the house's special sauce. It was a complex recipe he had created, but it never turned out quite as he imagined. "Can I help?" Hope offered timidly. "No thanks. It's a very specific recipe," Michael replied, focused on the stove. Hope watched for a few minutes, then approached again. "Sir, with all due respect, but you're using too much sugar, and the pepper should go in at the end or it loses its aroma." Michael stopped and looked at her irritably. "Ma'am, I studied culinary arts in New York. I know what I'm doing." "Of course you do, sir. I was just trying to help." But when Michael tasted the sauce half an hour later, he realized something was indeed off. The flavor wasn't what he had expected. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. On Friday, the eve of the food critic's visit, Michael was nervous. Everything had to be perfect. Mountain Flavors was struggling, and this review could either save or sink the business for good. During dinner preparations, one of the most important dishes ended up with a strange taste. Michael tasted it and made a face. Samantha tried to help, but couldn't identify the issue either. "It tastes burnt, but I didn't burn anything," said Michael, desperate. That's when Hope quietly stepped closer. "May I take a look?" With no other options, Michael nodded. Hope tasted a small amount and immediately pinpointed the problem. The garlic was sautéed on too high heat. Even if it didn't visibly burn, the bitter flavor spreads through the whole dish. "You'll need to start over, but this time on low heat. Very low." Michael followed her advice, and the result was perfect. Better than any version he'd made before. "How did you know?" he asked, impressed. "My grandma Margaret always said a garlic is like the heart. If you rush and hurt it, the bitterness lingers forever." That evening, when the food critic arrived, Michael asked Hope to stay in the kitchen to assist. She prepared a special sauce using a technique her grandmother had taught her decades ago. The critic, A strict and demanding man named Robert Williams tasted each dish with a serious expression. But when he tried the sauce Hope had made, his expression completely changed. His eyes filled with tears, and he stayed silent for a long moment. "Who made this sauce?" he finally asked. "I developed the recipe," Michael replied, not mentioning Hope. "This flavor, it reminds me of my childhood. My grandmother used to make something similar when I was little." The review published in the local paper on Saturday was glowing. Robert wrote about a unique culinary experience, especially praising a sauce that awakened deep emotional memories and showed that true cooking touches the soul. The restaurant was packed all week. People came from other cities just to try the dishes praised in the review. Michael was thrilled, but Samantha grew increasingly uneasy. She knew much of the success was due to Hope's quiet contributions, but the chef took all the credit. "Michael, you need to acknowledge what she did," Samantha said in private. "What are you talking about?" "I created the recipes." "But she guided you, and that sauce the critic loved." "She made it. I saw it." Michael shifted uncomfortably. Acknowledging Hope's role would mean admitting he needed help from an elderly woman with no formal training. Meanwhile, Hope slept in a small storage room at the back of the restaurant. Michael didn't know, but she had nowhere else to go after losing her home to pay her late husband Edward's medical debts. Every night, she curled up between sacks of flour and cans of oil, using her coat as a blanket. It was better than sleeping on the street, but the dignity she'd lost hurt more than the physical discomfort. One early morning, Samantha arrived early to start baking and found Hope asleep in the storage room. At first, she was shocked. Then a pang of guilt hit her, forever feeling jealous. "Mrs. Anderson, have you been sleeping here?" she asked softly. Hope woke up startled and tried to explain. "Please don't tell Sir Michael. I leave early in the morning and only come back for work. I'm not in anyone's way." "But do you have a home?" Hope lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I lost everything when my Edward got sick. The treatments were so expensive. After he passed, I couldn't pay the debts." Samantha's heart ached. For days, she'd seen Hope only as a threat to her position, never considering the woman's struggles. "Do you have children?" "I have a daughter, Catherine, but she lives in Atlanta, has her own life. I didn't want to bother her." "Does she know about your situation?" Hope shook her head. "I don't want her to worry." She had suffered enough watching her father waste away. Samantha had promised to keep it a secret, but that revelation completely changed her perspective on Hope. The following week, news arrived that excited Michael. An important businessman was interested in investing in the restaurant. Richard Blackwood was well known in the area for his successful ventures and had requested a meeting to discuss a potential partnership. "Samantha, if he decides to invest, we can expand. Open more locations, hire more people," Michael said excitedly. But when Richard arrived for the first meeting, Hope saw him through the small window separating the kitchen from the dining area and felt her blood run cold. It was the same man who had deceived her husband Edward years ago, causing her family's financial ruin. Hope had to lean on the counter to keep from falling. The memories came flooding back all at once. The false promises, the fraudulent contract, Edward's despair when he realized he had lost the family's entire savings. "Mrs. Anderson, are you all right?" Samantha asked, noticing the sudden paleness in the woman's face. "That man, I know him," Hope murmured, discreetly pointing at Richard. "He's the businessman who wants to invest in the restaurant. Michael is very excited." Hope felt a lump in her throat. She needed to warn Michael about Richard's questionable character, but who would believe the word of an elderly widow against a respected businessman? During the meeting, Hope served coffee to the two men. Her hands trembled so much she nearly dropped the cup. Richard glanced at her briefly but showed no sign of recognition. "Your restaurant has potential," Richard told Michael. "With the right investment and a few menu changes, we could turn this into a chain." "What kind of changes?" Michael asked. "Nothing too drastic. Maybe modernize some recipes, optimize costs. You mentioned you have an assistant who knows about special spices?" Michael hesitated. "She's temporary. A woman who's been helping me out for a few days." "I see. Well, we'll have to evaluate whether it's worth keeping employees who are, let's say, non-essential." Hope heard everything from the hallway and felt a chill. Richard still had the same cold, calculating demeanor from decades ago. That night, she sought out Michael to talk. "Sir, may I speak with you privately?" "Of course, Mrs. Anderson. What is it?" "It's about that businessman who came today. I know him, and I need to warn you that—" "Mrs. Anderson," Michael interrupted, "I understand your concern about your job, but Mr. Blackwood is a respected businessman. I can't make decisions based on, well, personal impressions." "It's not just an impression, sir. That man ruined my family. He deceived my husband in a business deal and— I'm sorry, but this sounds like a misunderstanding. Mr. Blackwood has excellent references." Michael walked away, leaving Hope with her words stuck in her throat. The frustration of not being taken seriously reminded her of all the times she had been underestimated in her life. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Richard began visiting the restaurant regularly, studying the operation and making suggestions. He constantly praised Michael, feeding the young chef's ego. "You have real talent, Michael. With the right investment, you could become a national reference." Hope watched everything with growing apprehension. She knew Richard's tactics all too well. First, he gained his victims' trust with flattery and grand promises, then gradually took control. During one of these visits, Richard tasted a dish Hope had helped season. His expression changed subtly, and he asked Michael, "Is this seasoning technique yours?" "I developed it based on some traditional Southern recipes," answered Michael, once again omitting Hope's involvement. "Interesting. It reminds me of something I've tasted before, but I can't recall where." Hope, who was organizing some utensils nearby, felt Richard's gaze on her. This time there was something different in his eyes, as if a distant memory were being stirred. That same week, Michael announced to the team that Richard had decided to invest in the restaurant. "We're going to become a franchise. Mr. Richard will handle the administrative and financial side, and I'll focus on the culinary side." Samantha was happy about the opportunity, but noticed Hope had gone pale at the news. "What about the current staff?" asked one of the cooks. "Everyone will be evaluated. Those who adapt to the new standard will stay," Michael replied. After the meeting, Hope sought out Samantha. "Samantha, can I trust you?" "Of course, Mrs. Anderson. I need to tell you something about this Richard. 20 years ago, he deceived my husband Edward in a food distribution deal. My husband had a small business producing handmade preserves. Richard showed up offering a partnership to expand the business." Hope paused, painful memories resurfacing. "My Edward was an honest man. He believed the promises. He invested all our savings into increasing production. But the contract Richard had prepared had clauses that only benefited him. By the time we realized, it was too late." "What happened?" "Richard took all the recipes, the clients, everything. My husband lost the business and fell into a deep depression. After that, his health began to decline. I believe the grief sped up the illness that took him." Samantha listened quietly, sensing the sincerity in Hope's voice. "Have you tried telling Michael this?" "I tried, but he doesn't believe me. He thinks it's jealousy over me possibly losing my job." "And your daughter? Does she know this story?" "Catherine knows we lost everything, but I never shared the details. She was graduating college at the time. I didn't want to burden her." Samantha promised to help Hope find a way to expose the truth about Richard. Meanwhile, Richard began implementing changes in the restaurant. He brought in a consultant he trusted to optimize the menu and costs. "Some recipes need to be simplified," the consultant explained to Michael. "Very specific spices drive up production costs. But those spices are what make our sauce unique," Michael argued. "We can replace them with commercial seasonings. The average customer won't notice the difference." Hope, overhearing the conversation from the kitchen, felt anger rising in her chest. It was exactly the same rhetoric Richard had used with her husband. Cut costs, simplify processes, maximize profits. That night, she decided to prepare a special dinner to show Michael what he was about to lose. Using her ancestral techniques and the spices she had brought with her, she crafted a sequence of dishes that told her family's story through flavors. The first dish was a soup her great-grandmother used to make with homegrown ingredients. The second, a sautéed vegetable dish with spices her grandmother Margaret had learned in the estate where she worked. The third, a stewed meat with the secret sauce her husband Edward had created for their old business. "Mrs. Anderson, what's this surprise?" Michael asked when he saw the set table. "I wanted you to taste my family's true cooking before everything changes." Michael tasted each dish in silence. The flavors were unlike anything he had ever experienced. There was a complexity and depth that his culinary studies had never managed to replicate. "Where did you learn these recipes?" "They've been in my family for generations. My grandmother Margaret worked in an important household here in Charleston. The family she cooked for had culinary traditions from Portugal, but my grandmother adapted everything to our southern way." "And your husband? You mentioned he had a food business." "My Edward took the family recipes and turned them into a business. He made handmade preserves that were in high demand, but a bad man took advantage of his kindness and stole everything." Michael began paying closer attention to Hope's story. "Stole how?" "He showed up offering a partnership, promising to expand the business. My poor husband believed him, invested everything we had into a bigger factory. But the contract was rigged. That man took the recipes, the clients, everything." "And where is this man now?" Hope looked straight into Michael's eyes. "He's here in your restaurant. He's your new partner, Richard Blackwood." Michael fell silent for a long moment, processing the information. "Mrs. Anderson, these are very serious accusations." "I know, sir, and I know it's hard to believe, but you need to be careful. That man already ruined my family once. I don't want to see you go through the same." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. Hope's words echoed in his mind, mixed with the extraordinary taste of that dinner. The next day, during a meeting with Richard, Michael tried to observe the businessman with new eyes. He paid attention to his words, his gestures, his way of handling negotiations. "Michael, we need to decide which recipes will be part of the franchise's standard menu," Richard said. "I suggest we document all of them to ensure consistency. Some recipes are very specific. They depend on hard-to-find ingredients." "Exactly. That's why we need to simplify them. I have a food lab that can develop industrial substitutes for those artisanal seasonings." Michael felt a chill. It was exactly what Hope had described. First gain trust, then take control of the recipes. "What if I prefer to keep the original recipes?" "Of course you can keep them in some special locations, but for national expansion we need practicality and economies of scale." After the meeting, Michael sought out Samantha. "Do you believe Mrs. Anderson's story about Richard?" "I believe her, Michael. You should have seen her face when he showed up at the restaurant. She turned white as a ghost. But how can I be sure? It's just her word against his." "Then let's look for proof. If she's telling the truth, there must be some documentation from back then." That afternoon, Samantha talked to Hope about gathering evidence from the past. "I kept some papers from Edward's business days," Hope said. "They're in an old suitcase I left with a neighbor when I lost the house. Can we go get them?" "I don't have money for the trip to Savannah where the neighbor lives." Samantha offered to pay for the trip, and together they went to retrieve the documents over the weekend. The neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, was a 70-year-old woman who had been a close friend of Hope's. "Hope, my dear, how are you? I was worried when you disappeared." "I'm fine, Mrs. Johnson. I came for that suitcase I left here." "Of course, it's in the back room. But tell me, where are you living now?" Hope hesitated, embarrassed. "I'm getting by. I found work in Charleston." Mrs. Johnson noticed her evasion, but didn't press. The suitcase contained old photos, contracts, letters, and even some newspaper clippings from when Edward's business was growing. Samantha helped Hope sort through the papers, and they found documents that clearly showed the partnership between Edward Anderson and Richard Blackwood. There were contracts, printed emails, and even a photo from an opening where the two appeared together. "Here's the proof," said Samantha, holding a contract. "Look at the clauses. Richard really kept disproportionate percentages of the profits and had rights to the recipes in case the partnership dissolved." Hope sighed. "My Edward was good in the kitchen, but naive about business. He believed everything that man said." On the way back, Samantha asked about Hope's daughter. "Why haven't you reached out to Catherine? She must be worried." "I don't want to be a burden in her life. Catherine works hard, has her own bills to pay. How can I explain that I'm sleeping in a pantry?" "But she's your daughter. I'm sure she'd want to help." Hope shook her head stubbornly. "I'd rather sort out my life first, then reach out to my daughter." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. On Monday, Samantha showed the documents to Michael. The young chef was shocked to see the evidence of his new partner's questionable character. "My God, Mrs. Anderson was telling the truth." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I've already signed some papers with him. If I back out now, I could face legal trouble." "But you can't move forward knowing who he really is." Michael was torn between the opportunity for professional growth and his ethical principles. Meanwhile, Richard began to suspect something was changing in Michael's behavior. During meetings, the chef asked more direct questions about the contracts and seemed less enthusiastic about the proposals. One afternoon, Richard arrived at the restaurant early and found Hope preparing spices in the kitchen. He approached her unnoticed and watched her techniques. "Interesting method," he remarked, startling Hope. "Sorry, sir. I didn't hear you come in." "How long have you worked here?" "A few weeks." "And where did you learn these techniques?" Hope hesitated, sensing danger in the question. "From my family." "Did your family work in cooking?" "My grandmother cooked for an important household." Richard continued observing her with growing interest. "And what was your maiden name?" Hope's heart raced. He was starting to remember. "Margaret. My grandmother was Margaret Thompson." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Margaret, the cook for the Williams family?" Hope nodded reluctantly. "And you would be—" "Hope Anderson. I was Hope Thompson before I married." Richard fell silent for a few seconds, the pieces clicking in his mind. Hope Thompson, Margaret's granddaughter, who married Edward Anderson. "You remember?" "Of course I remember. How could I forget the family that nearly ruined my business with their baseless accusations?" Hope felt a mix of anger and fear. "Baseless accusations? You stole my husband's company." "I strictly followed what was in the contract. If your husband didn't understand the clauses, that's not my problem." "You took advantage of his trust. Business is business, Hope. Or should I call you Mrs. Anderson? I see life hasn't been too kind to you since then." The cruelty in Richard's words made Hope tremble with indignation. "What do you want?" "Nothing specific. I just found it interesting to run into you here, just as I'm doing business with your boss. Interesting coincidences, don't you think?" "It's not a coincidence. I needed work and this place took me in." "I see. And I imagine you've already tried telling your version of the story to Michael, haven't you?" Hope didn't answer, but her expression gave her away. "Don't worry," Richard continued with a cynical smile. "Michael is a smart man. He knows how to tell real opportunities from, let's say, old grudges." That night, Richard sought out Michael for a private conversation. "Michael, I need to talk about your temporary employee." "Mrs. Anderson?" "Exactly. I found out we have some shared history. A few years ago I did business with her husband. Unfortunately, the partnership didn't work out, and she's been left with a negative impression of me." "What kind of business?" "Food distribution. Her husband had some interesting recipes, but he couldn't manage the business properly. When the company went under, she blamed me for the failure." Michael listened carefully, comparing Richard's version with what he'd seen in the documents. "And what do you suggest?" "Just that you be careful. People holding grudges might try to sabotage new projects. I don't want our partnership harmed by past misunderstandings. I understand your concern, but Mrs. Anderson has been very helpful here." "Of course, I'm not questioning her work, just warning you about possible conflicts of interest." After the conversation, Michael was even more confused. He had the documented evidence showing Richard's questionable practices, but he also had to admit the businessman was skillful in presenting his side of the story. The next day, Hope noticed a subtle shift in how Michael treated her. He was more distant, less receptive to her cooking suggestions. "Did something happen?" asked Samantha, sensing the tension. "I think Richard talked to Michael about me," Hope replied. "What kind of talk?" "Probably gave his version of the story. That man is very clever. He knows how to twist situations." Samantha decided to confront Michael about it. "Michael, did you talk to Richard about Mrs. Anderson? He told me he knew her husband, that there were some disagreements in the past." "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe, Samantha. Everyone tells a different story." "But you've seen the documents, the proof is there." "Contracts can be interpreted in different ways. Maybe her husband really didn't understand the clauses." Samantha realized Richard was successfully planting doubts in Michael's mind. "You're letting a shot at career growth cloud your ethical judgment." "It's not just that, Samantha. It's... Mrs. Anderson is a temporary employee. Richard can take me national. And what's that worth if it's built on injustice?" Michael had no answer. That week, Richard sped up the documentation process for the restaurant's recipes. He brought in a team to film the preparations and record every ingredient and technique used. "We need everything documented for standardization," he explained to Michael. During filming, Hope was instructed to stay away from the cameras. Officially, she didn't exist for the franchise project. Watching her techniques and seasonings being recorded without any credit, Hope felt a deep sadness. It was like watching history repeat itself. Once again, Richard was taking her family's knowledge without giving anything in return. One Thursday evening, after everyone had left, Hope stayed alone in the kitchen, organizing the spices. She was reflecting on her situation when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Richard appeared at the kitchen door. "Working late, Hope?" "Just tidying up a few things." "Mind if I come in?" Hope nodded nervously. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot." "How so?" "Well, that business with your husband was a long time ago. Maybe it's time to leave the past behind. You ruined my family's life." "Your family ruined itself, Hope, but I'm not here to argue about the past. I'm here to talk about the future." Richard approached and placed an envelope on the counter. "What's this?" "An offer. Inside this envelope is enough money for you to start over. Rent a decent house, buy new clothes, maybe even visit your daughter." Hope looked at the envelope suspiciously. "And what do you want in return?" "Just for you to disappear. Leave Charleston, start a new life somewhere else. No grudges, no revenge, no trying to sabotage my business." "And if I refuse?" "That would be a shame. I have some contacts at City Hall who could make your life complicated. Issues with paperwork, permits, those bureaucratic things that can be very annoying for someone without the means to resolve them." The veiled threat made Hope tremble. "Think carefully, Hope. It's a good offer. Much better than staying here being treated like, well, like a disposable employee." Richard left the kitchen, leaving the envelope on the counter. Hope stood alone, staring at the money that could solve all her immediate problems. It was more cash than she'd seen in months. She thought of her daughter, Catherine, whom she hadn't seen in nearly a year. She thought of having her own home again, of not having to sleep in a pantry. She thought of the dignity she'd lost, but she also thought of her husband, Edward, how proud he'd be if she had the courage to stand up to Richard. She thought of Grandma Margaret, who always said honor was worth more than any money. She picked up the envelope and put it in her bag. She wouldn't make the decision that night. The next morning, Samantha arrived early and found Hope already working, but with a downcast expression. "Did something happen?" Hope told her about the encounter with Richard and showed her the envelope. "He's trying to buy your silence," Samantha said, indignant. "I don't know what to do, Samantha. It's a lot of money. It could change my life, but it would mean letting him win again. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe I'm too old to fight powerful men." Samantha took Hope's hands. "Mrs. Anderson, you've already lost so much because of this man. Don't lose your dignity too." "But if I stay, he'll make my life hell. You'll suffer the consequences too." "Then we'll face him together. You're not alone this time." Their conversation was interrupted by Michael's arrival. He looked worried. "Did you see the news today?" "What news?" "An article about labor issues in some of Richard's companies. Seems he has a history of not honoring agreements with employees. Samantha and Hope exchanged meaningful glances. Where did you see that? A former employee of his sent me the link. She said there are more people willing to speak out about his questionable practices. It was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. Finally, other voices were rising against Richard. Michael, Samantha said, I think it's time you heard the whole truth about what happened between Mrs. Anderson and Richard. Over the next hour, they went through all the documents, evidence, and details of the story. Michael listened silently, his certainty about Richard crumbling. Why didn't you tell me all this before? We tried, Hope replied. But you were excited about the growth opportunity. And I didn't want to believe I could be partnering with someone like that. Just then, Richard arrived at the restaurant for a scheduled meeting. He was accompanied by a lawyer and some documents. Michael, ready to sign the final partnership papers. Michael looked at Hope and Samantha, then back at Richard. Actually, I need to clarify a few things first. What kind of things? About your past relationship with Mrs. Anderson's family. Richard's face hardened. We've already discussed this. These are matters from the past that have no relevance to our current business. I have some documents here that suggest otherwise. Michael placed the old contracts on the table. Richard examined them quickly, his expression growing increasingly tense. Where did you get these? Mrs. Anderson kept all the documentation from her husband's business. These papers don't prove anything beyond what I've already said. They were legitimate deals. Legitimate but unethical. Ethics are a subjective concept in business, Michael. What matters is what's in the contract. To me, it matters how we treat people. And from what I see here, you took advantage of Mrs. Anderson's husband's trust. Richard realized he was losing control of the situation. Michael, don't let old resentments destroy a unique opportunity for professional growth. It's not resentment, it's principle. Principles don't pay the bills. You have employees who depend on this job. You have responsibilities. That's exactly why I can't partner with someone who has a history of harming others. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard's lawyer whispered something in his ear. Very well, Michael. If that's your decision, I respect it. But know that you're passing up the chance to become a national name. I'd rather be an honest local name than a dishonest national one. Richard began gathering his papers, clearly irritated. I just hope you don't regret this decision. So far, my only regret is having considered this partnership. After Richard left, the restaurant fell silent. Michael slumped into a chair, processing what had just happened. Did I do the right thing? He asked Hope and Samantha. You did, sir, Hope answered, tears in her eyes. My husband would be proud to see someone with your courage. Samantha hugged Michael. We'll find other ways to grow, honest ways. But the situation wasn't resolved yet. Richard wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat easily. By the end of that week, the restaurant began facing strange problems. The health permit was questioned by inspectors, the gas supplier had delivery issues, and even the business license was challenged by city officials. It's Richard, Hope said. He told me he had connections at City Hall. Michael grew worried. The bureaucratic hurdles were disrupting the restaurant's operations. Maybe I should reconsider. I can't let you all suffer because of my decision. We can't give in to blackmail, Samantha said. If we back down now, he'll know he can control us through fear. Hope was particularly shaken. She felt guilty for bringing trouble to people who had been kind to her. Maybe I should accept his offer and leave, she told Samantha in private. That way, you can have peace. Mrs. Anderson, running away won't solve anything. He'll just keep doing this to others. But I don't have the strength to fight him. I'm already too tired. Samantha realized Hope was at her emotional limit. You're not alone. We need to find a way to expose what he's doing. That's when they had an idea. If Richard was using local political influence, maybe they could use the press to pressure those same authorities. Robert Williams, the food critic who had praised the restaurant, was also an investigative journalist. Samantha decided to reach out to him. Robert, I need to talk to you about a situation that might interest you as a journalist. What's it about? A local businessman is using political influence to pressure a small restaurant. There's a history of questionable practices. Robert was intrigued by the story, and scheduled an interview with Michael, Samantha, and Hope. During the interview, Hope shared her entire story in detail. She showed the documents, explained the culinary techniques she had learned from her family, and described how Richard had ruined her husband's business. "It's an important story," said Robert. "It reveals a pattern of behavior that might be affecting others too." "Would you publish it?" "Yes, but I need more sources. Other people who've been harmed by him." In the following weeks, Robert investigated Richard's background and found other victims willing to speak: former employees, small business owners who had been swindled, suppliers who hadn't been paid. The article was published on a Sunday and caused a major stir in the region. The headline read, "The businessman who builds fortunes on others' ruins, the story of families destroyed by predatory contracts." Hope's story was the centerpiece of the article, but Robert had documented at least a dozen similar cases involving Richard. On Monday, calls started pouring into the restaurant. People who had read the article and wanted to meet the cook from the story. Old customers of Edward who remembered his handmade preserves. Even some distant relatives of Hope who had lost touch. But the most important call came on Tuesday morning. "Hello, I'm looking for Hope Anderson." "That's me." "Mom, it's Catherine." Hope nearly dropped the phone. "Catherine, my daughter." "Mom, I read the article in the paper. Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" "I didn't want to worry you, sweetheart." "Worry me? Mom, I'm your daughter. I should have been by your side, helping." "Where are you?" "I'm driving to Charleston. I'll be there in 2 hours." Hope hung up and began to cry. Samantha hugged her, sharing her emotion. "Your daughter's coming?" "Yes, after almost a year without seeing each other." When Catherine arrived at the restaurant, Hope could hardly believe it. Her daughter was there, real, holding her tight. Catherine was 40, a university professor in Atlanta, and had felt terribly guilty upon learning about the hardships her mother had faced. "Mom, why didn't you reach out? I could have helped." "I didn't want to be a burden, sweetheart. You have your own life." "My life includes you, Mom. It always has." Catherine met Michael and Samantha, thanking them for taking her mother in. "You don't know how much this means to me." "Your mother is a special person," said Michael. "She's taught us more about cooking in a few weeks than I learned in years of culinary school." That night, Catherine slept at the restaurant beside her mother. In the small pantry, Hope had turned into a makeshift bedroom. "Mom, tomorrow we'll look for a real home for you, a proper house." "I don't have money for rent, sweetheart." "I do. And besides, you'll start getting paid for your work here. Right, Michael?" Michael nodded. "It's about time we formalized Mrs. Anderson's position. She'll be our official consulting chef." In the days that followed, the article's impact continued to grow. Local authorities began investigating the allegations against Richard, and the restaurant's bureaucratic issues were quickly resolved. Richard tried to counterattack by suing the paper for defamation, but the evidence was too strong. Instead, he found himself facing multiple lawsuits filed by his former victims. A week after the article was published, he showed up at the restaurant during business hours. The place was packed with curious customers, eager to meet Hope and try her food. "I need to talk to you," he said to Hope, ignoring the hostile glares from the staff. "I have nothing to say to you, sir." "Please, just 5 minutes." Michael stepped forward. "I think you'd better leave. I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came to apologize." The word apologize left everyone surprised. "What do you mean?" asked Hope. "The newspaper article made me reflect on many things. Maybe I really was unfair to your family in the past." "Maybe?" "All right, I was unfair, and I want to make amends." "How?" Richard took an envelope from his pocket. "I want to return what I took from your family, with interest." "I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" Hope thought for a moment. "I want you to publicly acknowledge what you did. I want you to apologize to my husband's memory, and I want you to stop harming other families." "And if I do that? Then maybe we can have peace." Richard reluctantly agreed. The following week, he published a note in the same newspaper, admitting his past mistakes and committing to compensate all the families he had wronged. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a public acknowledgement that brought some peace to Hope's heart. With the situation settled, Catherine decided to move temporarily to Charleston to be closer to her mother. "I got a transfer from the university," she announced. "I'll be teaching at the Charleston campus for at least a year." "But your life was all set in Atlanta." "My life is where you are, Mom. I've already spent too much time away from you." Catherine rented a small but comfortable house in the historic district, where she and Hope began living together. The restaurant thrived with the media attention. Hope became a minor local celebrity, known as the cook who stood up to the corrupt businessman. But she preferred to be known simply as the woman who made the best sauce in Charleston. Michael implemented significant changes in the business. He created a special menu called Grandma Margaret's Recipes in honor of Hope's grandmother. Each dish came with a short story about its family origins. Samantha was promoted to executive chef, working alongside Hope to create new dishes that blended traditional techniques with modern presentations. The restaurant also began offering cooking classes taught by Hope, where she shared the ancestral techniques she had learned from her family. "It's important to preserve this knowledge," she told her students. "Every recipe carries history, carries memory. When we lose these traditions, we lose part of who we are." One afternoon, while preparing spices for dinner, Hope found an old photo Catherine had brought from Atlanta. It was a family picture taken during their last Christmas together before Edward fell ill. Looking at the photo, Hope felt a peace she hadn't known in years. There was justice in the world, even if it sometimes took a while. There were good people willing to help, even when you least expected it. And there was family, there was always family. "What are you thinking about?" asked Samantha, walking over. "I'm thinking my Edward would be proud. Not just because we stood up to Richard, but because we found a way to turn our pain into something positive." "How so?" "These recipes I'm teaching, these stories I'm sharing, they're the real legacy my family left behind. Money he can steal, contracts he can manipulate, but memories and traditions, no one can take those from us." That evening, the restaurant was as busy as ever. Hope watched the kitchen activity with satisfaction. Catherine helped with service, Samantha coordinated the dishes, and Michael chatted with the customers. It was a new family that had formed, bound not by blood but by food, mutual respect, and overcoming hardships together. At the end of the shift, when everyone had left, Hope stayed alone in the kitchen for a few minutes. She picked up a jar of spices and inhaled the familiar aroma that connected her to her roots. "Thank you, Grandma Margaret," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me that true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we're able to give." She put the spices away and turned off the lights. Outside, Catherine was waiting to walk home together. "Ready, Mom?" "Ready, daughter." They strolled through the cobblestone streets of Charleston under the glow of the old lampposts. Hope thought about life's strange turns. She had lost a house but found a home. She had lost financial dignity but regained her moral strength. "Mom," Catherine said, "there's something I want to tell you." "What is it, dear?" "I want to learn your recipes, all of them, so when I have children, I can pass them down." Hope smiled. "We'll start tomorrow. There's a bread recipe your great-grandmother used to make that you'll love." "What was her name again?" "Margaret. Margaret Thompson. A strong woman who went through so much but never lost faith in people's goodness." "Just like you." "Oh dear, I almost did. If it weren't for Michael giving me this chance, Samantha being my friend, and you coming back to me." "But you didn't, and that's what matters." They reached home and sat on the small porch to talk a little longer before bed. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Did you ever think about accepting Richard's offer? The money he proposed?" Hope hesitated. "I did. For a moment, I thought it would be easier to take it and start over somewhere else." "What changed your mind?" "You." "Me?" "I thought, what will I tell my daughter when she asks why I ran instead of fighting? I didn't want you to be ashamed of me." Catherine held her mother's hand. "I'd never be ashamed of you, Mom. Never. But I'm proud you had the courage to fight. That courage came from the friends I made. Alone, I would have run. That's why it's important to have good people by your side." "True. And now we have a new family. a chosen family. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds of the historic town. "Mom, one more thing." "Yes?" "I want you to know how proud I am of you, of what you did, how you faced everything." "Thank you, dear. That means so much to me." "And Mom?" "Yes?" "Don't ever hide your struggles from me again, promise?" "I promise." They went inside and got ready for bed. Hope lay in the comfortable bed of her new home and gazed through the window at the stars above Charleston. She thought of Edward, how happy he'd be knowing she'd found peace and dignity again. She thought of Grandma Margaret and all the generations of strong women in her family who had faced hardships with courage. She fell asleep with a smile, knowing tomorrow would bring another day of honest work, true relationships, and family togetherness. Mountain Flavors continued to thrive. 6 months later, Michael opened a second location, this time as a true partnership with Hope, who became a minority owner and official consulting chef. The new spot was dedicated solely to traditional family recipes, and Hope personally trained the entire kitchen staff. Richard, meanwhile, faced multiple lawsuits and had to sell several of his businesses to pay settlements. He left Charleston and was never seen in the area again. Catherine completed her transfer to the local university and settled in town permanently. She started dating a fellow professor and talked of soon giving Hope grandchildren. Samantha launched her own culinary consulting business, always recommending the techniques she'd learned from Hope. And Robert Williams, the journalist who had exposed the story, won a regional investigative journalism award for the article that had changed so many lives. 1 year after the first meeting between Hope and Michael, the restaurant held a special celebration. It was the 1-year anniversary of the new family, as they had begun calling themselves. During the party, Michael gave an emotional speech. "A year ago, I thought I knew everything about cooking. I had studied at the best schools, read all the books, but it was a humble woman, with a bag of spices and a heart full of history, who taught me the most important lesson, that true cooking isn't about the techniques we learn, but the memories we create and preserve." Hope, moved, replied, "And you all taught me that family isn't just those we're born with, it's those who choose to stand by us when life gets hard." The party went on late into the night, with live music, plenty of food, and many stories shared. At the end of the evening, as they helped clean up the restaurant, Hope found a note someone had left on one of the tables. "Thank you for showing us it's never too late to start over. Your story gave me the courage to face my own problems. An admirer." Hope showed the note to Catherine. "See, our story is inspiring others. As it should be, Mom. Stories of resilience are meant to be shared. You know what? I think I finally understand what my grandmother Margaret meant when she said, 'Life always gives a second chance to those who don't give up.' Was she right?" She was. It just took me a while to see it." They finished tidying up and got ready to head home. "Catherine?" "Yes, Mom." "Thank you." "For what?" "For coming back, for staying, for helping me not give up. Thank you for teaching me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up." They left the restaurant together, walking through the quiet streets of Charleston. The town slept peacefully, its historic buildings bathed in the glow of the full moon. Hope looked back one last time before turning the corner. The sign for Mountain Flavors shone softly in the darkness, a symbol of everything she had achieved through perseverance and the kindness of strangers who had become family. There was no doubt left in her heart. She had found her place in the world again, and this time she wasn't alone. The end. Now tell us what you thought of Hope's story and her fight for dignity. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to rely on the kindness of strangers? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts and your own experiences. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories like this one.